Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. I hope you're all having a great start to your week. I took last week off of just posting or doing anything, and it was so nice. I'm coming back so refreshed and alive, and cannot wait to share this episode with you guys today. My guest today is Brittney Hartley. She is a spiritual director at No Nonsense Spirituality. She has a master's degree in theology with an emphasis on the future of American religion. I started following Britt a while back on TikTok and just really appreciated how insightful and nuanced her opinions and beliefs were when it came to spirituality and religion. She also talks a lot about things going on in the current society and culture. It's really, really cool. You can find her TikTok and Instagram under the handle No Nonsense Spirituality for all of the spiritual tools, no belief required. Her book also just recently came out. It came out just before this podcast episode is airing. So I will link the book on Amazon in the show notes. I will also link her website and her handles. I've recently bought her book as well. It is really great so far. So if you enjoyed the conversation today, I highly recommend checking it out. In this episode, we talk a lot about spirituality. We talk a lot about organized religion, atheism. No matter what your spirituality is, I really hope this conversation is approachable. I think no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum, this conversation is just really interesting and dives deep into what spirituality can look like and how subjective it is, how different it is all over the world. It is not meant to offend anybody. No matter what your spiritual beliefs are, you are welcome and they are valid. This is really just Brittney's take on spirituality and what she's trying to do, especially for people who maybe believe in something but struggle with the idea of getting behind the specific events in history that certain religious scriptures might want you to have faith in or believe in. I really hope you guys enjoy. Please let me know what you think of the episode. Send me a DM or leave a response on Spotify or Apple. And if you really enjoy it and you enjoy conversations like this, absolutely share with a friend. And now let's get into the episode. Brittney Hartley, welcome to the Untrivial Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. On TikTok, you are under the handle No Nonsense Spirituality, and you talk so much about spirituality, religion, society as a whole. So I would love to just first understand, what's your background and how did you get into this space?
Yeah, so I've been interested in the question of just what is for a long time. I was a curious child in that way, but I was raised as a Mormon, and so I spent a good chunk of my adult life and, my childhood being Mormon, and then I deconstructed Mormonism, and then I hung out in Christianity, and I actually got a master's degree at a Christian seminary. And then I deconstructed Christianity, and then I deconstructed God, and then I just kept on deconstructing. And as I was reconstructing, I had so many tools that I had found in all of my studies of history and philosophy and religion. I was a history teacher before I started to do what I do now. But I didn't believe in God anymore, and I didn't know what to do with that. And so really no nonsense spirituality is about rescuing all the tools that I really have been housed in religion for so long without having to believe things that for me were too unbelievable to believe. And so I want the tools without the nonsense. And so that's my approach to spirituality now.
I love that. So growing up Mormon, was there a time that you did believe? Were you always sort of questioning what was true, what was correct about this religion you were brought up in, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, when I was younger, I definitely believed. It's such a cohesive community that you really don't even know what's happening outside of Mormonism. So I definitely believed. By the time that I was a teenager, I was starting to have what I know now is called cognitive dissonance. Back then, I didn't have words for it. I just felt like an angsty teenager and like this didn't make sense. I was actually removed from my home when I was 16 because of, the choices that I was making, and found kind of in my senior year of high school, I found nuanced Christianity, some, C.S. Lewis and apologetics and a deeper kind of religion. some mysticism, because I was trying to figure out what was true because I'm by myself. Senior year of high school, I've been kicked out of my home. And so I found that there was something still interesting about religion. I just maybe hadn't, deepened enough into it, and maybe, the things that were bothering me were more cultural. So I really dove into some of the more mystical and beautiful aspects of religion, and then continued in my adult life when things really started to not make sense, or polygamy or Joseph Smith or all these things, kept deconstructing, and eventually did leave Mormonism. But I did believe for a time, yeah.
Yeah. What about the mysticism or elements of Christianity and that nuanced Christianity did you find more appealing than Mormonism?
It's interesting to look at Jesus from a different perspective. So, the Jesus that I was introduced to was this Jesus who is a CEO of the real, true, one and only church kind of thing, which is really hard to get that from historical Jesus, who seems to be more or less a homeless mystic with some interesting teachings and interesting parables. I worked with apologetic professors and people who are in this space, people who are really pulling out the most beautiful things about the Bible and Jesus's teachings, and mystic teachers and Rumi poetry, and really digging into these really beautiful aspects of human nature, and what makes life worth living, and transcendent love and things like that. And that was really interesting to me and really beautiful. And some of those stories and aspects of religion or Christianity in specific, I still take with me, even though I now consider myself an atheist. But it was just very different than the CEO, one true church Jesus that I was introduced to with Mormonism.
And it's so interesting you call it that there's all these elements of religion that you find so beautiful, so inspiring, so wonderful, but then there's these parts of you that maybe don't necessarily align with every single thing that's taught. So I guess I'm curious, you mentioned that you did eventually stop believing in God, and I'm wondering what that process and what that looked like over time.
Yeah, so I went to Christian seminary. I was in something called process theology, which is this idea that God is in process. It's a little bit easier to it's a God that's easier to handle the problem of evil. And it was very interesting and beautiful, this idea of a relational God, a non-coercive God, things like that. But I got this seed of doubt when I was in Christian seminary. I went all the way up to all but dissertation. So I went past my master's degree almost to a doctorate. And I had this nagging doubt that we kept creating gods, and maybe we were the ones creating God rather than God creating us. And that was just a little seed of doubt that I'd had for a long time. And eventually I couldn't ignore it. And when it came time to write my dissertation, I realized I don't think I believe in God anymore. I think we're the ones doing this, because we have 10,000 gods. Right now, there's about 4,000 gods on offer. We have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of gods and religions that have died. They really reflect often the society and human needs at the time. So there's similarities and there's differences. And once you really dig into it and study it, you start to see, oh, I think we're the ones doing this. I think we're the ones creating God. And even though this God that I was kind of studying with process theology was interesting and sometimes even beautiful, I couldn't escape the feeling that we're just creating a God that feels a little bit better to worship than the Old Testament God. We're just doing it again. We're just creating another God. Is there another way to have a rich spiritual life and have spiritual tools and all the beautiful things that I love about religion and spirituality without having to play this game? Because we're bad at this game. We're bad at the game of what is God and what does God want and what is God thinking and what is God doing and why did God do this? And when you really look back to our historical answers on that question, we're always wrong. We're just always wrong. It's a game that we're bad at. And so I just eventually came to think that maybe we need to let this game go and try another approach to spirituality that doesn't include having to know truth claims that we just don't know.
hmm Do you receive a lot of pushback in terms of this belief, and like how have people reacted to your new approach and belief system when it comes to religion and God?
Yeah, it's a big hit or miss. So what I do now with atheist and no nonsense spirituality is I'm trying to I'm trying to pull out the tool and separate it from truth claims that I would consider to be either nonsense, or at least we don't know enough yet to be able to make that kind of truth claim. And so the pushback that I get, I'll get pushback from the religious who say obviously that I'm going to hell because I'm a heathen in various ways. And I'll get pushback from atheists who say, like, religion only does harm. Religion is just for stupid people.
Mm.
Religion is all bad. Spirituality is all stupid. And so I'll get pushback from atheists too, that I'm being a little bit generous to the things that I love about spirituality and religion. And I also get pushback from the occult space, the tarot, witchcraft space, because there are tools there. But just like religion, there's also a lot of truth claims there that I'm skeptical to. And so I'll get pushback from that saying, if I'll make a TikTok post on astrology or something like that, I'll get a lot of people saying the same things that you would say, that Christians would say, which is, oh, you don't really understand this, and it gets more complicated than that, and you're just being close-minded, you're being racist. And so I get pushback from all three camps. The people who resonate with me are people who are open to things like ritual and awe and conversation with your conscious and subconscious mind, and spiritual experience and psychedelics and mysticism and teachings and less suffering and inner peace, and they're interested in all these things but have some level of skepticism or have been burned before by religion. Those are people who tend to want to hang out in the space that I'm in.
Oh my goodness. It sounds like you don't have a home necessarily. You've created your own new home, which I think is such a beautiful place to be because I think it's so dynamic and it's so nuanced and it's so complex. Whereas I think a lot of times there are these very rigid boxes around religion in certain ways that, like you, I think a lot of people maybe struggle with or want to question, but that feels like you're doing the worst thing ever by questioning religion or questioning, what's been said to be true or untrue about history or the past or God or Jesus. So I totally resonate with kind of being curious, but also that skepticism that a lot of people have, especially when we're curious. So I think a big piece of that is this skepticism about just having faith with like no proof, no reason, no nothing to back it up really. So how do you approach people who say, well, you just have to have faith and like I just have faith in this? And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so it depends on the situation. If I'm on social media, I might talk about this a little bit more spicy than I would if I was with someone one on one. I do. My approach tends to be I want to be hard on ideas, especially ideas that cause harm in the world. And faith sometimes does cause harm in the world. So I really want to be tough on ideas, but soft on people because I also used to be a faithful person too. I was a Mormon, right? And so I try to be as best I can soft on people, including my previous self, but tough on ideas that cause harm in the world. And I do my best to kind of follow that approach. But when it comes to faith, I really want to dig into why someone considers it to be a moral virtue. Because in any other field except for religion, faith or jumping into something without proof or evidence is not considered a moral virtue. And so one question that I had for God for a long time is, why is faith in the correct unbelievable story the most important thing to God? Why would that trump things like love and compassion? Why would faith in the correct unbelievable story when we have thousands upon thousands of unbelievable stories? And even with Christianity, we have thousands of sects of Christianity, even if you consider that story to be the truth. And the Bible is just so complex. It's almost if God put us in this world full of all these books, but maybe one sentence of it he wrote on the wall that was true, and wants to judge us by if we found the truth or not. And I just always struggled with this idea of, why is it a moral virtue? Why would a God care more about your belief in something unbelievable than something like love and compassion? And that's where the faith starts to really break down. And when I do that with people, they start to realize, oh, faith is what they are doing to spiritually bypass things. They don't have to think about things. They don't have to feel about things. When grandma dies, I don't have to feel it because of my faith. When I have hard questions for you as an atheist, I don't have to think about it because I have faith. And it starts to reveal that faith is really just operating for most people as a kind of spiritual bypassing tool. It's just bypassing thoughts and feelings that you don't want to deal with. That would really benefit you if you dug into them. There's a lot of personal growth in facing those fears and those questions rather than doing the bypass tool, which is just have faith. Because I see no reason for it to be a moral virtue. Even if there was a God, I see no reason for it to be the highest moral value to a God. And if it is the highest moral value to that God, then my moral compass and God's moral compass are so different, it's unfair to even be judged by that God. And so that's
Mm.
kind of where my mind went with faith.
Yeah. And I think people's faith, it's for a lot of people, it's so tied to their identity, their community, their sense of self, their sense of how to operate in the world. And when you call into question that, it's obviously can bring up so many different feelings and so much dissonance that's really, really uncomfortable for people. But what would you say? Because I heard you say, well, love and compassion are stronger than faith, or that feels more important. What about when people say to you, my faith is in these moral values and principles in the Bible or with God, when he does teach love and compassion and, love thy neighbor and those things? Like, do they ever respond by saying my faith is rooted in those really great virtues?
Yes, sometimes, especially with more nuanced Christians, you can get some arguments about how faith really is just hope for good things that they're seeing in the Bible or good things that Jesus is talking about. But the problem with that is you're using a middleman, which means that you're looking at the Bible and the Bible has no inherent cohesive message. It really is a mess when you dig into it. And so when people say, I live my life according to the Bible, what they don't realize is the Bible is just a middleman. It's not really doing anything because you are deciding that this scripture about having slaves is not something you're going to live your life by. But this scripture in the Sermon on the Mount, you are going to live your life by. And so you think that the Bible is doing that. But no, the Bible itself can't tell you which messages are really true and which rules are really true and which ones are not. And so people will, pick out something about homosexuality in Leviticus, but then the scriptures just before it or just after it that talk about not mixing fabrics, they ignore those.
Mm.
And so, really, everyone who reads the Bible and says that they're living by the Bible message, you are ignoring some messages, radically reconstructing some problematic scriptures, and choosing the scriptures that you want to live by. And so, you don't need the Bible for that. You're the one doing that already. The Bible's not doing that for you. And so, what I would say to that to people who say, I use faith and I use the Bible in order to get here, you don't need the Bible for that because you were the one who did that. You were the one who did that with the Bible. Now we can still pull out messages and cool parables to work with for inner work, and by now I'm somewhat of an expert on the Bible just by the time that I've spent in Christian seminary, and some of that still has value to me, but it's not because it has this inherent message. It's because of what we're bringing to the text, and that's my inner morality that I'm born with, this golden rule sense that I'm born with, plus a conversation in society about what morality is, and that we don't do slavery anymore and things like that. And so we can actually bypass the Bible because what we were doing with the Bible is what we already have, which is a social conversation and our inner sense of the golden rule, which is what all morality is based on.
Mm. So, where do you believe that golden rule comes from?
I think it's a social adaptation. I think it's an evolutionary one that we share with other animal species, especially primates. And I'm glad that we have it. So I do think I tend more towards evolutionary things, explanations of things. And so I do think it's an evolutionary tool that in order for us to survive as a tribe, we have selfish desires to keep ourselves alive, but we also have social desires in order to live in tribes and be able to feel what the other person is feeling and heal one another and talk to one another and relate to one another and bond with one another. We couldn't do that if we didn't have these tendencies towards empathy. So in religion, we call the selfish desires, Satan and evil, or the natural man, or whatever, and we call the social desires, good and sacred, and God and things like that. But really, they're both evolutionary desires that we have that we can learn to balance.
That makes sense. And I totally agree with your point. Like, it's people do cherry pick their morality. They cherry pick what feels right for them, what feels right in their community, what their minister is preaching as that moral thing could be very different than another minister in a different region saying something else. So it is very kind of subjective when you break it down in terms of how much information is in the Bible or in these other various religious texts, and then what we actually pull out to be how we govern ourselves or live our lives. That's so true. You mentioned harmful ideas, and I wanted to get into that a little bit in terms of what do you think are some harmful ideas that have come out of religion that are, impacting society or impacting people in a negative way?
Yeah, I think that there's more obvious ones and then there's more subtle ones there. So obvious ones are just things like violence, ideas like jihad. I live in Idaho here, where we have the Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell trial, where God spoke to me and now my kids are dead, and Jesus will validate me for that because I'm in relationship with Jesus. So there's big, violent, obvious ones that I think people are more familiar with. But I think I'm more interested in the subtle ones. Religion really helps you to be prone to conspiracy theories, and it actually reduces your ability to think rationally. So, for example, many people may think that Mormons, yes, they're weird and they're quirky, but they're not blowing people up on trains. Like, let's just leave them alone. They're fine. But then when Trump comes out, and the one religion who really, more than any other religion, stood for Trump and showed up at January 6th was the Mormons. We are really, as a people, prone to these leadership worship things that we get from being kind of a prophet worshiping kind of religion. There's all these elements of religion that really prime Mormonism to be susceptible to things like MLMs, things like that. So you wouldn't think on face value that Mormonism is harmful, and yet Mormons, more than any other religion, really showed up in a way that could have destabilized democracy in America because of what religion is doing to your brain, especially when it comes to, quieting your inner voice, trusting leadership and authority, and that can become very dangerous. And so there's a lot of subtle ways that religion will show up. We'll start doing stem cell research work, and now all the Christians are showing up and blocking it because those are souls. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to be complicated. And then something like the second coming, people will say, well, why don't you just let me have my belief? I believe that Jesus is coming again, and I'm not hurting anyone, so why can't I just believe it? But in reality, when you have a large portion of the population that wants the world to end because that's the only way that it's going to be better because Jesus is going to save us, that's limiting these people, their time and their resources and their thought towards things that could actually make the world better because we're waiting for Jesus to save it. And so there's big, violent, and terrible things that religions do, but also on the subtle level, just this ability to just have faith and focus on the other, the next life, other worlds, thinking that God is talking to you, which then becomes cults, and eventually, they start asking for your wives in these cults. Always God wants, the leader to have a lot of sex, surprisingly.
Mm,
And it just gets so messy and complicated that I think it inhibits our ability to actually make the world a better place.
yeah, I've watched a lot of cult documentaries as well, and oh my
You
goodness,
just
like
wait.
what
It's like, oh, here it is. Here's the
oh my
God
goodness.
revelation. He gets your wives.
Yeah.
Here it comes.
It's crazy how many times that's happened. And yeah, that blows my mind. Um, you were talking about the concept of worship and people getting into this um, problem of like worshiping someone who, is someone like Trump or something like that, for example. What would you say if they just said to you, like, this person aligns with my values and like, I just want to support them because I feel our values are aligned? Do you think there's any truth to that, or do you think it's it's they've been like quote unquote brainwashed or it's conspiracy.
Yeah, I'm more on the side for everyone. I'm not going to pick on just Trumpers for this, but I'm more on the side that everyone makes emotional decisions that we then call rational or have rational
Mm,
justifications for. But really, we are subconscious feeling creatures, and the majority of the math on what we're doing as far as our decisions is done in the dark of our attention. This is why I don't think that we have free will, which maybe is a topic for another day. But when we add rationality to, I'm trying to pull up some things about Trump that I value, like he holds up a Bible and whatever he does that seems to align with my values. Really, at bottom though, there's an emotional decision happening that we're just adding, we're adding rationality to later. This is true of anyone of any belief that if the belief is benefiting you psychologically or socially, we will choose to support that because of all that it's doing for us psychologically, and then we'll add our rationality later. So I don't think that we're rational creatures enough that we're just always making rational decisions.
yeah, that makes sense. If we are not worshiping, and obviously a lot of people are not religious, but what if people say if we're not worshiping a god or a higher power or a higher being, does that lead to worship of the self? And like, is that harmful? What are your thoughts on making like self or humans the kind of be all end all creature or being of the world?
It is a problem. It is one of the reasons that these religious discussions lately get so interesting. So lately in religious debates, and I'm watching all the debates on YouTube as I can about religion and where it's going, because really my focus in my master's degree was the future of American religion. That's what I wrote my kind of master thesis on. And so I'm really interested in this conversation. And something that shifted that happened is it used to be in these religious debates that people were trying to prove this is true. And that became too hard and too subjective and revealed that maybe we don't know if it's true. That the religious conversation shifted into religion is good for you, regardless if it's true or not. You hear this with Jordan
Mm,
Peterson, you hear this with Ben Shapiro. So the new kind of religious argument when you watch YouTube debates with religious people and atheists, for example, is not even if religion is true or not, but that religion is good, because by creating an ideal like God, even if we're just doing it in our brains, we're working towards it individually and getting better, perhaps because you want to model your life like you want to be like Jesus, something like that. And you're also able to do that communally because you're working towards the same goal. This is what we want heaven to
right.
be. And that secularism can't offer that. And so even if religion isn't true, this is what we should be doing. And it's it's
Totally.
it's a fair argument. Like it's an argument that I've seen really, people are really digging into, is this argument true? Because secularism will never be able to organize like religion can because it doesn't have a shared myth. So there is an argument. I think it's a fair argument that maybe there isn't God, but believing in one helps you to work towards it. Praying to a God daily maybe helps you to work towards your highest self, even if there is no God. So why not? Why not just play this game? And I guess for me, I have too much religious trauma to play a game like that where I'm gonna pretend something for the benefits. I really do think now that there's a way to get all the benefits of religion and belief and everything that God did for us and could do for us societally or individually. It's just fundamentalism is too dangerous to keep playing this game. And I think that we can play this game without having to do that self-delusion. I really think that we can pull out the tool, whatever it was doing, without having to believe in the unbelievable, which will have negative effects somewhere else in society. So it's a fair argument, but I'm still going to go with I think we can pull out the helpful tools, even the tools of imagining, something and working towards it, or the goal of doing communities that do that. I think we can do it without God, and I think we have to try because it's just too dangerous as all of our truths and religions are bumping into each other now that we have a modern world. We're never going to be able to solve modern problems, especially at a global scale, until we can agree at some level of base reality. And if we have most people playing otherworldly games, we're never going to be able to actually make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I hear you. I too think that argument is pretty fair that like if we're all working towards something, if this idea is benefiting us as a society, us individually, we're being kinder to people, we have a similar moral framework that we're operating in. I think that is net positive. Um, but it just made me think of actually something really funny. I was on TikTok and this girl was talking about I used to think I needed religion for like the choir and feeling like that was Jesus. And then I just went to a regular concert and I felt the
Yeah.
same thing. And
I've
it's
heard that
almost
too,
like that
that I
idea.
didn't know that the Holy Spirit was just a key change in a song.
Yeah, and it's like this idea that you can still feel these really powerful things that move you as a community, and religion is so great at providing community. And maybe there's that element of prayer or confession where you're being really mindful and you're tuning in and like you're owning up to things. And I think those concepts have been, yes, used in religion, but we've also in modern society really found a way to experience those things and have those aspects of positivity, of connecting to ourselves, of turning inwards, that do not involve religion either. And I think that's really interesting. And so is that what you see people kind of utilizing in terms of tools to kind of get those benefits that you see in religion, but without that element or component of God?
Yeah, I think that people are doing it more subconsciously than consciously. I don't think that most people say, "Oh, here's a list of all the things that religions do, as I'm not religious or I'm leaving religion, I'm going to replace it with all these authentic things that do the same thing." I don't think that people are that intentional. I think you have to work with someone like a spiritual director or a therapist to actually do that work consciously. But I think people
Mm,
are doing that work subconsciously. They're looking for community. They want to go to concerts. They're looking for people who can teach them, skills in inner work. They're following therapists on TikTok to get some of that. Or they'll bump into, they'll try a Buddhist Zen center around the corner just to see what it's about. Or they will start to get into some of these kind of new religious movements. So maybe it's a social justice movement, maybe it's a fandom that you get super into, and your pilgrimage
mm,
is going to Comic-Con. And so I think religion is still always there because religion is just how we orient ourselves in the universe. Organized religion is in decline, but we're still the same humans as 1,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago. We still have more or less the same brains. And so our needs for religion, for meaning, for awe, for transcendence, for connection, for ritual are the same. And so what I really want to do is I think people are kind of more blindly and subconsciously trying to fill in these aspects. And when we can give it names and we can give it language, and when I can give you options, and when we can see what resonates with you and what doesn't, then we can do this work more intentionally of finding really your spiritual path or your life path, and do that work consciously rather than subconsciously.
mhm. And you mentioned, organized religion being more in decline these days and in this generation. And so I know you talk a little bit about nihilism as well, and it's almost like this notion of people losing that organized religion or losing those communities, but then replacing it with nothing or despair or a lack of meaning. So how do you make sense of that? What are your thoughts on kind of this new generation feeling a lot of nihilism?
Yeah, so nihilism is something I experienced personally. And so when we say nihilism, we're really talking about the belief that there's no inherent meaning in the universe, that there's no reason for us to be here. There's no kind of God that's watching over this. There's no place that we're going to get to, that there's no inherent meaning to us being alive and being in the universe. And for some people, that is a freeing thing. For some people, leaving religion, for example, that can be very freeing because then they are free to create their own meaning, and they do so pretty well, and they're optimistic about it, and they go on to make these thriving lives. For me, I got stuck there for a while because I didn't have the tools to make that shift into making my life meaningful from the ground up rather than from kind of top down, universal story
Mm,
down. And that's what happens to a lot of people who leave religion is your brain's still looking for some overarching meaning, and when it doesn't find any, that can be really disorienting. So for me, that looked like I had lost religion, I had lost God, I had lost my community, I was losing my marriage because my husband was Mormon, I was losing sense of self, I was losing free will. I had really lost any psychological or social anchor. I had completely lost. And what we call that nihilism, we call that the void, in everything everywhere all at once. It's the everything bagel. It's this really scary place where you don't have any anchors. You don't have any way to make a decision. There's no up from down. Everything is meaningless. And so there is a tendency, if you don't have tools or language or someone to be able to help you in that space, then we can turn towards hedonism, which is, well, then I'm just going to do whatever feels good in the moment. And then we just kind of turn into these pleasure seeking. I always have to be on my phone. I always have to be chasing the next drug. I always have to be chasing the next thing. I always have to be numb in order to kind of face this
Mm.
reality. So the danger of fundamentalism is really violent. The danger of nihilism is really self-violent. This is where we see numbing behaviors and existential depression and suicide. It's really more inflicted kind of on the self. And it's a dangerous place to be. There's danger of too much order, but there's also danger of too much chaos. And I spent some time there, and it took me a while to find tools to be able to help grow out of that place. And so this is what Gen Z is experiencing now, is that, millennials, my generation, we're leaving religion, but then Gen Z, without things to replace it, without a community, without an identity, without belonging, without spiritual tools, now, there's a large portion of Gen Z that, when they say, "What do you want to be?" Grow up, I want to be famous. I just, and missing kind of some of the aspects of life that really make it meaningful because they've lost religion. So it's a danger now for Gen Z, because with Gen Z, they, as a whole, aren't struggling with too much order. Like, there's just too much order in my life. I need to break free of all these institutions. They're seeing not just religion, but society in general, all institutions being deconstructed and broken down. So their
Hmm.
problem isn't too much order. Their problem is too much chaos. I don't know who I am. I don't know how to find a spiritual path that works for me. I don't know what's true. I don't know how to make my life meaningful. I don't have any tools to deal with my anxiety. So I'm reading tarot cards, I'm asking astrologers on TikTok, I'm asking pendulum swingers if I should leave my boyfriend on TikTok, because they just don't have any tools, and for how to deal with death and anxieties and fears and all these things that religion have had answers for in the past. And so this is where we are with nihilism now, is that we're leaving kind of institutions and orders and structures. And in some ways that's good, because obviously these institutions caused a lot of harm in the world and to people, but now we're getting the problems of the opposite side of the coin, which is now it's too much chaos. And Gen Z is really paying the price for that, especially with anxiety, depression, and addiction and suicide.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is still that desperate seeking of order and wanting something to align yourself to and wanting community to align yourself to. And that's where I think I hear some people on the maybe more like pro religion side is like, okay, and now they're going to attach to something that maybe doesn't have the same positive values as my religion, or doesn't have the same yeah, like positive behaviors that they're promoting. So it's like you find yourself as a Gen Z, maybe who lacks that structure, attaching to something that could be much more harmful for you.
We
Yeah.
saw that with like Hillsong, that these kids were just showing
Mm.
up to this really exciting, this preacher guy who's making, Christianity cool again. And then of course, like, he starts wanting other sexual partners. Like what happens with all cults, and the whole thing falls. But these kids were seeking something, and they were hungry for something. And that's why I want to have more spiritual tools out there, especially for this generation, but for myself too, of what happens when we lose our belief or we become skeptical in the modern world because of how much we know about science. We can't just go back to religion in the same way, but yet we're hungry for something. And that's where I feel people, myself included, be stuck. And so that's why I really want to rescue some of these spiritual tools from religion, shake off some of the craziness off of it, shake off some of the beliefs around it, it and just get to the tool so that you have the capacity to live in between order and chaos where you're still growing, but you have some structure and some foundation too. That tends to be where we're the healthiest.
Mhm. So what do you think the answer is? Like, what are those tools that you really want people to start utilizing and exploring that could help them in this feeling of confusion or chaos?
I define spirituality as connection, so connection to your deepest self and connection to outside of yourself. For some people, that includes a higher power. For me, it's more something like collective consciousness or the story of humanity, something like that. But really, spirituality has been shown to be our like if you could put spirituality in a pill, it would be our strongest antidote against depression, numbing behaviors, risky behaviors, and suicide. And so really that connection piece is our way forward. And there's many ways to do that because humans feel that in a variety of ways. And so really what I want the conversation to be about is here's what religions used to do for us. They scheduled times for awe. They gave us opportunities for moments of transcendence where you transcend your usual negative brain and can feel connected and inner peace and things like that, or things that people feel on psychedelics. And religions do community and religions do connection. How are you connecting daily or weekly to your deepest self and outside of yourself? And service and ritual, which is ritual is the scientifically our best way to process things, process emotions out of our body, and to increase pleasure and also decrease pain. There's all these tools that religions have. I want to kind of just take that list and say, how can we do this in a way that's authentic for you? When do you feel connected to yourself? How do you feel connected outside of yourself? How do you, what's a ritual that calls you to your best self? Is it a quote? Is it drinking the tea that your grandma made you? Is it, and we, from the ground up, from you up, kind of build that into your life. So it's essentially your own religion. What's your morality? What's your reason for living? What's your meaning and purpose? And once we kind of go through the list of what religions did and take all those tools and build it from an authentic place, then people can feel like they can create a life worth living at the level of experience, which is our greatest antidote to nihilism. Any nihilist philosopher you read eventually come to this point of if there's no ultimate meaning, no heaven, no God, then life is experience. And how do you want to experience this game? And so for video game players, for example, they're not playing the game to get to the end because then they're happy, they're just happy at the end. Or there's some like check off list, I have to finish this game by Saturday. That's not why they're playing the video game. They're playing the video game because they enjoy being in the game. They enjoy the levels, they enjoy the struggle, they just enjoy it. And so really life becomes how can we create this video game in a way that you want to play it with the players and levels and projects that you want to play in just for the joy of playing in it. And when we make that shift, it becomes less about ultimate meaning and more about creating meaning and creating your connection and creating a really rich life that you're awake for until our turn is over. And I've seen people make that shift, and that's when life gets better.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think everyone is so unique and so different and feels things differently and wants to experience things in different ways and holds different values. And to be able to live a life that feels completely custom and kind of meaningful to you as an individual, it sounds amazing. My one question with that is if there's no shared framework, is that a problem? Or can it be we all kind of have our own unique framework, our own unique journey, our own unique morals, values, and beliefs?
Yeah, and this is really the problem, right? So this is the problem of secularism in general is that without shared myths or without shared frameworks, we don't have these kind of large scale organizations that can help with some of these tools. And really, people will ask me, well, like, let's change the world. Let's create new religions that do what you're talking about. And the problem is, unless you have dogma and you're tapping into that really tribal part of your brain, you're not going to be able to get real full scale organizations. And so some people are more optimistic than me and think that we can change the world and we can have organizations that do this. I'm a little bit more pessimistic that we can do that. I think when you talk about big, large scale organizations, you only get that with dogma and culty behaviors and really have to believe these things, because then you get the tithing and you get the resources and then you get the donated time. So atheists, there's a lot of benefits to being an atheist, but the downside is herding atheists is like herding cats. You can tell it's the shadow side of atheism. You can ask an atheist, is it a good thing to once in a while look up at the stars and consider our place in the solar system? They'll say, absolutely. Totally off-filled experience for me to do that. Okay, let's put a day on the calendar for us to do that. Then that becomes almost impossible, because there's no dogma that says you need to be here at this time, or there will be
Right.
social problems for you.
Repercussions.
Yeah, social repercussions if you don't show up. And so people just go to sleep, or watch a show instead or whatever. And so it is the problem of this side of things. So either you pick the problem of being in nuanced religion and trying to do this within a religious organization, and I see people trying to do that sometimes in beautiful ways. This is like Richard Rohr type Christians, and I do think that there's a space for that. It's not something that I could do anymore, just because I couldn't play the God game anymore. But or you pick the problems of the other space, which is you're going to be a little bit more authentic, but you are going to have to build in your own community. You are going to have to do that.
Mm,
And it's hard. It is hard, but it is possible. And so really, I think I don't think that we're going to have anything like the Catholic Church for humanism. I don't think that's ever going to exist. Humanism keeps saying we can do this, and we have our 10, they don't call it commandments. We have our 10 commitments, and they sound so great, but they're never going to be an organization that is providing resources for my children in the same way that Mormons do. It's just not dogmatic enough. It doesn't tap into that side of our brains. So, yes, it's going to be hard because you don't get a built in community like you do with religion, but I think that people individually can create their own communities. And there's enough people looking for you, looking for someone to have deep conversations with, looking for someone to raise children with, looking for someone who's in these exact same problems, that with a little bit of putting yourself out there and some vulnerability and some intentionality, you can build your own community. And it's what I did when I was in nihilism and realized I need people. And I started to be a little bit more brave. And because of that bravery and that intentionality, this is the beautiful thing about nihilism, is I realized I'm going to die. I realized this is it. I'm going to be a little bit more brave in trying to find my people. And when I was, then I did. And now I have a really thriving community in the area that I live in, but I had to create it. So it's hard, but I do think that we can be responsible for creating our own local communities. And maybe that's the healthiest way to do that, because when you get bigger than that, it's going to be a cult at some level.
yeah. I love that story, and I think it's so great to hear that, kind of getting into the depths of nihilism and going, almost that being the catalyst for action and change and wanting community and seeking community. I think that's really beautiful for someone to hear if they're kind of in that stage of feeling like they're in chaos. This is your sign to be like, okay, and how are you going to, thrive and cope and continue to build and be happy and live this life that you do have, even if there's nothing afterwards? Like, how do you want this life to go while you're here?
It's this idea of sandcastles, that if you used to believe that there was a meaning and purpose to everything and everything was going to be okay, and then you realize that life is just sandcastles and we just build one thing and it goes away, it can be disheartening at first. It can feel like everything is stupid and pointless. But when you start building the sandcastles that you want to build just for the sake of building them, that's when life can become beautiful again. And it's a shift, especially for religious people. It's a shift, especially when you believed that everything was going to be okay, moving to the sandcastle idea. But it's where life can get better, because the great thing about nihilism is any pretentiousness goes away, any lies. The only thing that can survive nihilism is your deepest truths. It's the only thing that can survive there. And so it just kind of strips away all the things that don't matter and reveal what are the sandcastles that are worth building for me, just at the level of experience, just like how we used to be as children. There is this idea in religion that I think is beautiful of coming back to how you were as a child. It shows up in Christianity and Buddhism and a lot of religions because when we were children, we just played and we just connected and we just felt and we didn't build a tree house because we were going to build the best tree house and it was going to last years and years and be our legacy. We didn't think like that. We did it just for the moment. And so we can actually return to that state of play. And when we do that, and this is where mystics always go, they always talk about life as a dance or as play. And it's this place where we can go where we realize that life is here to be experienced and I can build my life in a way that I'm getting the experience out of life that I want to have. And that's when life gets better. And nihilism, rock bottom, it's a hard place. It's a suicidal place, but it is often the best place to build from because only what's true and what's real for you can survive there because your other people's opinions, what society demands of you, once you really get into nihilism, none of that matters. You realize that all of that is stupid and you're going to die and who cares. And then maybe that gives you that little bit of bravery that you need to actually intentionally build the life that you want to live in.
Yeah. That almost it feels comparable, just that concept to I know this is like a philosophical belief of death or confrontation with death, but people who have near death experiences or get confronted with illness and then survive, it's almost like they have a similar kind of new lease on life and new kind of appreciation for like, okay, what am I going to do while I'm here? Because I've just experienced the risk of not being here anymore. And I think that's so interesting. It feels really similar.
There is a benefit to looking at your existential fears with eyes wide open. Terror management theory is kind of all of our studies about how much our brain is trying to not think about the fact that we're going to die and all the creative ways that we come up to avoid death. And really, even though it's hard, and even though it feels like you're dying to face things like meaninglessness and death and being alone and all of our existential fears, the benefit is what you're talking about, that when you look at it, it changes you. And then death becomes a friend because death is the thing that focused your life on what you want your life to be. And that's how death becomes a friend. And so it's really beneficial to face these hard truths, even though it feels like they're going to kill you. Like these harsh truths, like losing free will, losing my sense of self, losing God, losing my community. Like I lost everything. It was hard. I died right in that place. But by looking at those things, the benefit on the other side is now I have a life that instead of waking up and wanting to die, I'm excited to live this day. I woke up today and knew that I could have a conversation with you about this. And having conversations about things that I want to talk about is one of the ways that I have meaning in my life. And so I get up today and, oh, great, I have a podcast today. And when I started, that's how, it took a year or two, but once I started to do that on purpose, that's when my life drastically changed into one that I'm excited to wake up for because it's built around how I want to spend my time before I die because I've looked at that and I face that.
Yeah. So you describe yourself as an atheist. What would you say is your personal philosophy, your personal views, or your personal spirituality, if you're comfortable getting into that?
Yeah, it's just pretty similar to kind of the messages that I've shared so far, but really it's this idea that if there was a God, because a lot of Christians will say, well, you're atheist, but once you die and you meet God, you're going to be really sorry. They love to tell me that on TikTok. One
Mm.
day you're going to be
Oh,
sorry. I get a lot of hate mail from Christians and Muslims too, and I think that people don't realize that as an atheist, if I were to die and I were to wake up at the pearly gates and I'm meeting God, I really wouldn't be afraid. I really wouldn't be scared. I really wouldn't have this sorry moment that all the Christians are hoping that I would have because they really want to say, I told you so, at least the ones that are loud on social media. And really in that moment, I wouldn't be afraid or I wouldn't fear because I know that I searched for God. This wasn't one of those things where it was like, oh, I want to have sex with anyone that I want to, so I'm not going to believe in God so that I can blah 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 blah. No, I live a highly moral life without any promise of reward. I sought for God in every way I could, in every religion that I could find, in every temple that I've been to. I searched for God and had some amazing spiritual experiences that we call God, but not enough to really say that there's a God. And so, if I'm going to be meeting God, either he's a God not worthy of worship because he doesn't care that I tried to live a moral life as an atheist with no promise of reward, and I did my best to seek God, didn't find him, tried to live a good spiritual moral life anyway, tried to help people, tried to be the good Samaritan, help the people that I can help, which are people who are in nihilism, who are suffering. Either that God's not worthy of worship because all he cares about is that I left religion and going to throw me in hell, and fine, I'm happy to go to hell in that scenario because that's not a God that I want to sing praises to for eternity, or that God is a moral God, and and still there would be benefit to me living a moral life, maybe even more so without the promise of any reward and without belief. And so I have no fear about being an atheist. I don't think that there's a God. I think that gods are what we create. Once I dug into how much religion is helping us socially and psychologically, once I faced the fears that cause religion, I had no need for religion anymore. I had no need for God anymore. So I'm happy with my atheist stance, but I'm open to the magic of reality. Because one place where atheists get stuck is they'll say, I'm only going to believe what I can understand right now. And we understand just very little. There are things
Yeah.
that are hard to explain. Quantum physics is spooky. Quantum entanglement is insane. The fact that time is changes and is not, a constant variable, that's insane. What is consciousness? Oh my god, like there's so much mystery that reality itself is more mysterious than any religion that we've come up with. And we've come up with some weird ideas about what reality is. I think that actual reality is more mysterious than all of it. And so for me, I want to stay open, I want to stay curious. I want to understand the magic of reality, which is more insane than even our religion, sometimes even more counterintuitive than some of the things that we've believed in religion. I want to be open to spirituality, I want to be open to connection, I want to be open to tools that are helpful. I want to be open to mysticism, I want to be open to the good life. I want to be open to things that we find in religion, like transcending your neurotic mind and these things. I want to understand what happens when you take psychedelics, or these people who meditate for 20 years and can do these really amazing things with their mind. All of this I want to stay open to. I want to explore it, and I want to play, and I want to experience. Whenever I travel, I still will visit the local temples because I just want to understand what it's like to be human while I get to have this body. And so I don't do atheism as a kind of I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, which sometimes we get with atheists, right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, I don't want to play in that place where it just feels like it's a shutdown, where you just you know, and sometimes this happens where you feel better than everyone when you're a Christian, and then you deconstruct and you feel better than everyone as an atheist. And then you just become a missionary for atheism. And it's just a new kind of camp or club where you feel better than everyone. I don't want to do
Right.
that. I want to keep my skeptical mind. I want to be mindful of the trauma that I received as someone who was in religion, and pay attention to the red flags that are out there. But I want to explore the magic of whatever this is that is just so crazy to think about. And I want the best of both worlds. I don't want to have to shut off one or the other. I want to have both.
I love that. And you're coming from such a nuanced, thoughtful, complex approach, which I just think so many people can appreciate. I really appreciate that perspective. It feels so genuine, and like you've really tried to explore all these different areas of life, and you're just excited to continue living your life in all the ways that you can. That's so amazing. Um, you mentioned earlier your master's was on the future of religion or future of spirituality. What do you think that future looks like in America or North America?
Yeah, so right now it's a couple of things are happening. So organized religion is in decline. A lot of it has to do with problem of evil and historical truth claims, and then also social things like how the Christian church has treated gay people is a really big one, obviously. So it's a mix of social reasons and historical truth claims. And so two things are happening. We're having this big fundamentalist response from religion because there tends to be some bleeding. What happens is the religion then itself will kind of circle the wagons. They'll have really high identity markers. It'll feel chaotic, so we'll be more likely to have pastors and leaders and Trump like people who promise, if you just follow me, everything's going to be okay. We're going to go back to when life was great and make America great again and make Christianity the religion of America again. So we're getting a heightened fundamentalist response from religion currently in America because of people leaving and because of how unsettling that is for those in religion. So we're getting sometimes the worst of religion right now because they're responding to people leaving. And then, as far as outside of religion, we're having a rise of the feminine in response to kind of years of religion and spirituality really being under patriarchy. So there's a rise of the feminine, there's a rise of the occult. Right now, 1 in 5 adults regularly do something like tarot or talk to a medium or read their horoscope or whatever, which is it's pretty higher than it's been in the
Yeah.
past.
Oh, I love my horoscope.
And then so we're seeing a rise in intuition based things where, in the past your priest will tell you what to do, and now as a rejection to that, we're seeing this rise of I'm going to do this inner work, I'm going to do this shadow work journal, I'm going to do this tarot stuff, I'm going to tap into my spirit guides, I'm going to do that kind of thing. So we're seeing definitely a rise in the occult as a response to religion and spirituality being too hierarchical in decades previously. So this is kind of a pendulum thing that happens, that's been happening for a long time. Religion and the occult have always had this kind of weave tapestry together. And then we're also seeing new religions. And one of the books that I really liked in this space was called Strange Rites, 7 New Religions for a Godless America. And it talked about how, okay, people aren't going to sit in the pews anymore. Where are they going? Where are they going for these human needs? And it outlined kind of 7 new religions that people are identifying themselves as, even though they're not calling it a religion. Because when we think of religion, we think, Christianity or Islam or something like that. But they're acting in the same way as a religion. There's rituals, there's an in-out group, there's lingo, there's it's your identity, it's your belonging. So one is kind of just the sexual community where I am this, and that is like the first thing and most important thing about my identity. I am
Right.
gay, I am transsexual, this is my sexual community, these are the rules of my sexual community. So that world is acting like its own religion, where your sexual identity becomes really the most important orientation thing about you. Like, this is really what's defining how you're making decisions and who's in your in group and out group. There's the witchcraft and the growing witchcraft community, which is interesting. There's pros and cons with that approach. One of the pros is this occult witchcraft pagan world, it's much better at getting in touch with your intuitive wisdom and your inner wisdom than religion was, but it has the problems of the opposite side of the coin, which is, if there's no mentors, if there's no guidelines, if there's no community, if there's no person to check you, then it can just easily become the same kind of prosperity gospel that we saw in religion, where like this TikTok and like this TikTok and you'll have good luck next week, or I'm an asshole because Mercury's in retrograde, and you just do
Yeah.
the same spiritual bypassing that you did in religion, but nobody's calling it out because there's no community, there's no mentor to say, hey, I think you're doing some spiritual bypassing here. I think you're using this tool in a way where you're avoiding the inner work rather than doing the inner work. And so that's where witchcraft really goes off the handle for me. There's fandom culture, there's wellness culture, where
Oh,
it's
yeah.
almost like the way that you're avoiding death is, I'm going to eat this way, and I'm gonna, Gwyneth Paltrow world, where it's
Yeah.
almost like this illusion that you're going to cheat death because you're going to be so healthy. And Christians that end up there tend to do the same actions that they did in Christianity, where instead of having a sacrament to kind of absolve you from sin, you do a detox, and there's good foods and there's bad foods, and the world is toxic, right? Just like religion says.
Oh,
The
yeah.
world is toxic, but if you detox enough and do these things and buy these things and do these things, then you can be clean and you can be pure. It's
Yeah,
very religious. It's
it
very Christian
is.
almost. There's the technology utopia, which is anything that God used to promise to us. Now you have Silicon Valley technology people promising kind of the same kind of utopia things that we used to get from God that we're now hearing in the technology world. There's a kind of red pill, especially male online community that is like, let's just go back to our hierarchical tendencies. We need to go back to patriarchy. We need to go back to kind of a Darwinism society based on who's the fittest, that kind of thing. As a response, there's a growing, especially online community of that. And then social justice that we saw with Black Lives Matter, that people in my space started to notice, oh, this isn't just a political movement. This is actually how Gen Z is getting their spirituality. This is how they're connecting to something bigger than themselves. This is how they are
Mhm.
organizing events. This is how they are atoning for their sins in some way. There was a huge, it really became religious and spiritual, especially the Black Lives Matter movement. And for some people, the first thing that to replace religion when religion starts to go in decline is politics. and
Yeah.
and there's a fear of that, a valid fear. In fact, Ayan Hirsi Ali, who is a really famous atheist, and she was supposed to be in the conversation with the other four kind of leading atheists, and just a huge critic of Islam, recently said, I'm a Christian now. I moved over to Christianity. And one of the reasons she said is because, hey, there's all these political religions. The only thing that we have to combat political religions that are going to be worse is to be religious and just make it better. And so she actually left atheism because she's so concerned about political religions and what they can do,
Mm.
that she just said, well, maybe trying to be like Jesus is the best thing that we have to combat this. And so she became a Christian. And in her letter that talked about why she became a Christian, she talked about zero truth claims. It wasn't like, I know Jesus is my savior, I have a personal relationship with Christ. It was zero of that. It was, here are the political problems we have. Here are the problems that secularism can't address because it can't organize enough. Maybe we just need to be Christian and do better at it. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to do this. So it was really interesting. There is a
Wow.
problem with political religions because you never have to be wrong, and the other side is always going to be the evil thing. And I've said before that if I had to choose, like for my child, if I had to choose to raise them in a religion or a political religion, I would choose a religion, because at least in religion you'll have the Sermon on the Mount, you'll have the rich man and parable, you'll have these messages that point to something beautiful and a beautiful way of living. With political religions, you never get that. You
No.
never get someone doing that. You only get, we are the good guys, we're going to crusade because these are the bad guys and they're going to destroy the country. And both sides have that narrative. And you never get the mysticism that religion can get. So that part is dangerous. I do have fears about, this was Nietzsche's fear about religion, that it would create political religions that would be worse than religion. And in the 20th century, some of that is true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially in the States, like it is so polarizing. It is so, so contentious. And both sides just think the other side is the worst thing that's ever existed. And your whole kind of reason for being is to take the other person down. And even if you compare that to, like a religious tenet of like love thy neighbor or tolerance, like you don't get any of that in politics. It's like destroy that person if they disagree with you.
Mm-hmm. Makes it dangerous. It might just be something that we have to go through in order to realize, oh, we make religions, we made these political religions. Maybe it's just going to be a part of our process to, what Nietzsche says is that, God is dead, but we're still finding him in caves for thousands of years. We're still trying to create certainty. We're still trying to create religions and surety and one true path and good guys and bad guys. And some of that is in our genetic code, just as evolutionary creatures and as tribal creatures. And so we have biases that support that. And maybe on a grand scale, there are a lot of times that I'm pessimistic and say maybe on a grand scale, we never overcome that. It's always going to be one power structure fighting another power structure till the end of time. But individually, I think we can opt out of it. Maybe the matrix is always there. Maybe it always has been there. But there are people who have built homes in the wilderness and found other people in the wilderness too, and made communities out in the wilderness. And maybe that's the best that we can have. But as someone who has done that, it's way better than just saying, I'm just going to be in the matrix.
Absolutely. What would you say to someone who is maybe feeling lost spiritually, maybe struggling with meaning, but doesn't really know where to start?
Yeah, so where I usually start with that is the tree of contemplative practices. It's the largest study that we've done. I think it was either 2004 or 2008. It was the largest study that we've done on how humans feel connected. Like, how do they get that feeling where they're connected to something bigger, which is just really good for our mental health. It's really good for our spirituality. It's really good for meaning of life. Is when you get connected, you get out of your neurotic brain and you're just in this kind of flow state of just enjoying life, right? So, how do people feel that? And they gathered as many responses to that as they could. And then they kind of organized it into these 7 branches of options. Some of the things are like meditation, maybe you get that just by your quiet time and you can drop into that space. But some of it is things that you wouldn't think of. For some people, it's their bodies. These are people who don't get up and go running because they hate their body. They get up and go running because that's how they show up for themselves. That's how they stay connected. That's their time in nature. That's their time with their deepest self. Husband's like that. He doesn't read any books. He's not a language guy. I need conversation. I need information. I need to always be with words. That's how I'm connected. For my husband, he's not a words guy. But when he realized that he gets that through his kind of long runs and his long bike rides as he's training for his Ironman, he realized, oh, this is actually my spirituality. I do my shadow work on mile 20 when I'm on my marathon. I do my
Mm,
pilgrimage when I gather with my people and I go to an Ironman. And I get to experience this community. I've got other guys who are like me, entrepreneurs,
yeah.
Ironman types. And when he realized that that was his spirituality, then we could, instead of both trying to be Mormon and fitting into this box that we both felt shame about because we didn't fit the box, we actually could create our lives so that I'm supporting him in his triathlon training and realizing that that's an important key aspect of his life. And for me, it's going to be words and language and quiet time and girls' dinners. And now instead of kind of forcing us to go to church, I'm covering him for his spiritual needs and the things that help him to be connected. And he knows that girls' dinner isn't just social for me. Like
Mhm.
that is life to me. That is water for me, right?
Yeah.
And now he
Yeah.
knows how important it is for me so that he can cover me to do that, which I'm actually going to do tonight. I have girls' dinner tonight. And so that's when things get better is I really encourage you to look at that tree of all the options of how people feel that and say, oh, actually, my walk in the morning with my dog and my podcast, that is really what connects me to myself and my meaning and my purpose, and also outside of myself. It's really what helps me to feel like I'm alive, feel like I'm connected, feel like I'm awake rather than asleep. And what that is going to be different for each person, which is why, I wish I could just give you a 12-step program to get out of nihilism, but I can't because I don't know what that thing is for you. I can only point to these things and say, hey, let's look at this, what resonates with you. And I can only hold your hand while we do that process together, but it's not something that someone can give you because no one is you.
Mhm. You have a book coming out.
I do. I'm very excited. It's coming out April 22nd, so a little bit less than a month. And
Ooh.
it's if you've enjoyed any part of this conversation, I do a little bit of my story, but that part's very small. But I have a chapter for each one of these kind of spiritual tools that I've talked about so far so that someone could have a book that outlines these concepts. And at the end of each chapter, I have questions to ask yourself as if it's a workbook so that I could at least give you a book and say, I can't tell you what your ideal life looks like. If I tried to sell that to you, I'm just kind of a snake oil cult leader and I don't want to be that. But here are some things that can help you look inside and give some language to this so that you can start that journey on your own. So it has a lot of these spiritual tools. It has a chapter on nihilism. It also has a chapter on feminine spirituality and some of those lost voices of the conversation because women have never written scripture. And yeah, that comes out soon, and I'm very excited to just be able to hopefully give someone the book that I needed when I was in the space of life doesn't matter, this is all stupid, I just want to die, kind of. It's part of my meaning and purpose in life to help someone who is in that space because people helped me.
Yeah. And it's titled No Nonsense Spirituality.
It's titled No Nonsense Spirituality, All the Tools, No Faith Required.
Amazing. All right. As we wrap up here, my second last question for you. What is the takeaway? What is that one thing you would love to leave anyone with? Any message from the show or you or our conversation today?
I would say if you're anyone who resonates with my work are people who have gone to dark places. If you haven't had dark nights of the soul, I'm just probably not going to be your cup of tea. I'm just going to be insane. And that's fine. Like, you're probably not my people. But if you've listened to this entire conversation and you've been to some of these places, or you've had some of these fears, or you've had these moments of chaos or deconstruction or things like that, what I can say is life gets so much better on the other side of this, and to hold on. Because when you look at someone like the story of Alfred Nobel, who we do the Nobel Peace Prizes, he was this super rich guy. He never had a wife. He just had mistresses. He got rich by first making dynamite. He's a chemist. And then he got rich because he was able to develop weapons of war through kind of what he understood of dynamite, and made a lot of money. And he was just filthy rich and just kind of had a mansion, didn't have a wife and kids, and just loved his rich life for a time. And something happened that changed his life. And it was that his brother had died, and there was like a mix up in the obituary. And so he actually opened the morning paper and did what few people get the opportunity to do, which is he read his obituary in the paper. And the obituary said, "This was one of the worst guys ever. The world is worse because this guy lived. He made a bunch of money. He contributed nothing to society. Now we just have better war, ways of blowing each other up. And it would have been better for him to not be born." And it was a pretty scathing obituary.
Wow.
And he got to read it, and he got to realize that I'm going to die. And this obituary currently is true about me, that I'm just kind of living a life of pleasure, and my life didn't matter. It didn't matter to anyone. And so he took all his money and he said, you know what? Maybe I didn't do the best with my life, but I can use the money that I earned from weapons of war and give it to people who are doing amazing things in the world. And so he created, through his kind of inheritance fund, rather than giving it to his mistresses or whatever he was going to do with it. I don't even know what he was going to do with it. He put some aside for the mistresses and possible children that he had, but he put large chunks into the Nobel Prizes for people who are making advances in science, and also the Nobel Peace Prize, people who are making the world a better place. And so to this day, we give the Nobel Peace Prize to people who have made the world a better place. And we do it not on the anniversary of his birthday. We do it on the anniversary of his death day, because it was when he faced his death that he created the Nobel Peace Prize. And so today, most people know him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and they don't even know that the only reason we have the Nobel Peace Prize is he woke up and he faced death because he read his obituary in the paper. And this is what happens when, even though it's scary, even though we're deconstructing and society is deconstructing and gender is reconstructing and jobs and career and marriage and relationships and God and self and free will. I mean, it's a chaotic place right now. The beauty of it, though, is that when you deconstruct and when you face these things, you get the bravery and wisdom and insight and sight that you need to actually build a life that you're proud of. And not just proud of, but that you want to live, that you're happy to live a moral life, a happy life, a communal life, a connected life, a life with projects that you care about, a life with conversations that you care about. And I can just say that I've seen people make that shift, and I myself have made that shift. And so if you're in the dark place, if you're in the rock bottom place, it's the best place to make your life better. Because without that dark night of the soul, you're just going to do what society and your mommy and daddy tell you to. And then at the end of your life, most people have this regret. The majority of people have this regret. I wish I would have done what I really wanted to with my life. I wish I would have been a little bit more brave. I
Mm.
wish I would have done what I wanted to instead of doing what everyone else told me to, until now I'm at the end of my life and realize that I never got to live. Most people have that regret. And so if you don't want to be most people, it is rock bottom in this hard place that gets you there. So hang on, because it's an important part of your journey, but that I promise that it gets better.
That was so beautifully said. And thank you so much. So, as we wrap up, where can people get connected to you, learn more about you?
Yeah, so I got the book coming out, which has all my best stuff, and I really encourage you to do that. I have my website, which is no nonsense spirituality.com. I do coaching if this is something that is resonating with you. And I also have courses. So I have a nihilism course, I have a spiritual reconstruction course, I have a feminist spirituality course. I have a lot of courses that you can dig into, with workbooks that can really dig into some of these deeper spaces. And then you can find me on TikTok at No Nonsense Spirituality.
Brittney, this was such an amazing, inspiring, insightful conversation. I so appreciate your perspective and all the wisdom you've shared with us today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I really enjoyed it, and you asked really good questions that got to the root of things. So I appreciate you guiding this conversation.
Thank you.